Hello and welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I'm Stephen Ryan.
And I am Matthew Lucas, and we do post every week, so hit subscribe if you want to follow our continuing adventures. And Stephen, I feel that we have chosen a less than salubrious day to shoot again, but never mind. Well, summer in Macedon.
Particularly seeing as we're going to talk about summer-coloured foliage.
Yes.
So that's the topic.
So that is the topic, which I was kind of puzzled by, but once you explained what we were looking at, it seems intriguing. So, give us the lowdown. What do you mean by summer foliage?
Well, there's an example right behind us.
Coincidence.
Yes, it's plants, trees, shrubs that all have coloured foliage as opposed to green foliage throughout the whole of the summer months.
We tend to associate, I guess, coloured foliage with obviously autumn, fall,
yes,
but sometimes spring. Some things have flushes of very pink or reddish new growth.
What I wanted to talk about were two basic colours that aren't green when it comes to foliage.
Yes.
So we're going to talk about burgundy and we're going to talk about gold foliages.
Yes.
And of course the example behind us is a classical version of the burgundy stained foliage.
Yes.
And that's Cotinus, coggygria, grace, which is one of the purple leaf smoke bushes, and it's smoking as we speak. So we've got this
smoking hot on this damp summer's day.
Yeah, so you get this fabulous foliage that'll last you from spring till autumn. It will then go fabulous autumn colours, and in the meantime, in midsummer, you also get the fluffy plumes. So it pays its way.
Well, we also did a story about the Canary Island smoke bush, which is not a smoke bush.
Well, it is, but it's not related to this one.
Which we'll link below. Now, is it true about smoke bushae, the plural, that you need to prune them rigorously every year? What's the pruning regime?
Depends on how you're growing them.
Yep.
If you want particularly good foliage, then a good hard pruning each year is good because it'll encourage lots of strong growth with extra large, extra coloured leaves.
Yeah.
But you then tend not to get as many plumes. So if you want the rich plumes, then you don't prune as regularly. So you win one way or the other.
And if you didn't prune, does it become
It can make quite a small tree.
straggly tree?
Not necessarily. It can end up quite a nice billowy headed tree. So, you can let it go either way. It's really about how much room you've got and what you're trying to create. So whether you're trying to grow it mainly for its foliage or whether you want the other advantages of the plumes, etc.
Now, with a burgundy coloured shrub or tree, no matter what type you choose, where would you position it? Where would you think about placing it in relation to the colours in the other garden and perhaps its need for sun or not?
Well, most burgundies need sun, so that's almost a given. So wherever you plant burgundy foliage plants, they tend to need sun. For two reasons: they'll either lose their colour in the shade or they'll make a black hole and disappear. So light is really important for the burgundies, and any colour that you use in a garden opposed to green needs to be used more or less in isolation, otherwise it becomes a bit indigestible.
Right, interesting. And so to that point then, you wouldn't plant, say we're going to look at some golden leaf plants, would you plant a golden leaf plant near a burgundy leaf plant?
You could, but what you're then aiming for is a very strident contrast. So that may or may not be to everybody's taste, but if that's what you like. I mean, I've seen gardens where there's almost not a green leafed plant to be seen. So there's burgundy, there's gold, there's variegated. Your eye tends not to know where to look. So it's sort of wafting everywhere, trying to focus in on something.
All right. So what about hardiness? What about the cold, Stephen? The cold?
Well, Cotinus are remarkable. They will cope with probably almost the coldest gardening climates you can find.
Really?
Right through to the really hot Mediterranean style climates.
That surprises me. For some reason I thought it was more Mediterranean-y.
Well, they are from the Mediterranean, but they will go down to very low temperatures and they will also cope with a lot of dryness and heat in the summer.
So where does it come from?
Well, you'll see it around the south of France, all that sort of area of the world. It grows quite close to the coast, so it's always in well-drained soil though, so that's the main thing with them. But a remarkably tough group of plants.
Okay, well, we're going to now head to your nursery to look at some things that you've got which are sort of more unusual and coloured foliage plants.
Let's do that.
Let's go and have a look.
Now, the other colour that is particularly useful, I think, in summer, with discretion, are plants with golden foliage.
This is so golden, and you would think that we were actually in autumn, that it was an autumn colour, wouldn't you?
And it's not. It's the summer colour of the golden version of the English oak. So Quercus, robur, Concordia. It's a very slow growing tree.
Yes.
It does tend to scorch a bit in summer, so it doesn't want to be in the hottest sun. But the problem with gold foliage plants is that many of them have this issue with being sun scorched.
Yeah.
They're sort of like the redheads of the plant world. And so they do need that little bit of shelter, but not too much, because the other issue then comes about that if they're in too much shade, they tend to go green. So you've got to get the right light levels to keep the intensity of colour up.
So what would you suggest? Morning sun and then more protection, particularly in Australia, from the afternoon
Oh
sun?
yes, that's generally the way I would go. I would try and get them into a spot where they get the nice morning sun, but before it gets to sort of 11 o'clock midday, the sun would hopefully go off it. It could come back on it again really late in the afternoon when the intensity's gone out of it. But that's the sort of game you've got to play with golden foliages. The other thing I will say of golden foliages, in our strong lights in Australia, the overuse of them can bleach the whole environment out and everything can look chlorotic and mean. So
how interesting, and diseased.
Yes. So you do have to use any foliage colour with discretion. Golden foliages in too much quantity can be hard on the eye and look chlorotic. Burgundy foliages, well, you can end up looking like you've got a Gothic garden, a garden full of black holes. So you've got to be very careful how you use these leaves. So use a major concentration of greenery and use these types of plants as an interesting point of difference.
And in fact, that's exactly where this was. This is a specimen in your nursery, and it was sitting amongst green things, and it looks incredible surrounded by green.
Yep. But I must add, if you want a really strong contrast, gold with burgundy can of course be quite spectacular.
As we see here.
Yes, so it is definitely worth considering if you want that really bold effect in the garden.
This is gorgeous. Okay, well, let's look at another summer colour plant.
All right, what a good idea.
All right,
Matthew, you're going to hate this plant because it's variegated.
Okay, well, I'm going to surprise you by saying I don't hate variegated things. I am not a fan. But to me, you're going to laugh because you're such horticulturists, but this to me isn't variegated because it's not green and white. It is actually the most beautiful combination of pink and burgundy.
Exactly. But it's still variegation, so there you go. Because variegation just means that the plant has various colours in the leaves.
I know, they don't have to be green and creamy white.
So this is a weeping maple, so Acer palmatum dissectum, and it's a selection that was made in Japan, and it's called Hana matoi. And it won't be to everybody's taste.
But it is to mine.
But I think it's a fabulous little tree. And of course, we've talked about weeping maples before. In fact, we have a story on weeping maples, so we can put the link wherever. This particular one has not long been available in Australia, so it's still comparatively new here, and I actually think it's rather beautiful. I think it's a very subtly interesting variegation and a rather intriguing and different one.
I adore it. Now, just briefly then, this is quite shady because it's under the canopy of some larger maples. Sun, shade?
I think it needs more sun than it's actually getting. So if I had my truthers, I would probably have planted it out in a slightly more open aspect. But it's still keeping fairly good colour, so it's getting enough light to keep the colour up reasonably well.
Stunning, goodness me. Yet more gold, Stephen Ryan.
Yes. In fact, there's gold versions in a huge array of completely unrelated plants. I mean, there's gold leafed hydrangeas, there's golden oaks, as we've seen, there's golden poplars, there's golden elms, there's golden ashes, there's golden almost everything. But this particular plant is part of my national Cornus collection, my Dogwood collection, that I hold for Plant Trust here in Australia. And this is Cornus Florida Holman's Gold, which is a golden version of one of the North American dogwoods.
Right. Is the flower of any particular interest? Is it all about the foliage of this?
Well, it's more about the foliage because you've got that from spring till autumn, of course, and then the leaves will turn nice colours before they shed in the autumn, so you get that sort of change of foliage colour. But it still gets quite large, pure white, classical dogwood flowers on it. I have to say I'm quite pleased it's not a pink flowering yellow leaf dogwood. So white and yellow will go quite well together. I find pink and yellow a little bit of a problem in some ways for me. So it will have good flowers on it, but really when you think about it, dogwoods flower for quite a reasonable period. You normally get sort of 6 to 8 weeks out of a dogwood in bloom.
That's interesting. I always thought they were very
Oh no,
Three flowers.
no, that's the flowering cherries that do that. Dogwoods, because their flowers are composed mainly of colourful bracts and the true flower is the centre bit.
Like a hydrangea.
Like a hydrangea. The petally-ish bits are actually firmer and harder than the average petal, so therefore they tend to last longer.
That is very interesting. Now, I hope you're not going to be offended.
You can try.
It does, in some circumstances, it could look a little diseased.
Yeah, it could look quite chlorotic and ill.
Yes.
But used as a contrast plant amongst other things. If you've got other plants around, particularly green foliage plants, if they're looking healthy and verdant, then this will then not look as weird as if you had a whole border full of yellow things.
So, what would you say then are some guiding principles for the gardener in terms of placing in summer specific colours? So whether it's the burgundies and the bronzes, or whether it's the golds and the yellow leaf things, what should you bear in mind?
All right, there's a few things to keep in mind. We've mentioned with the oak the fact that you've got to be careful about
the sun.
Excessive exposure to sun. I would always use golds with a background of dark green because that will then lift the colour and make it look like everything else is healthy, so therefore this will be.
And when I've seen, so the oak tree, for example, is surrounded by green things, and it does, it looks like a beautiful specimen plant rather than a sick cousin.
Yes, exactly. And you
Sitting in the dark.
certainly wouldn't plant a straight green leaf dogwood right next to this, because if it's got the same looking foliage and this one's yellow and the other one's green, that makes the whole contrast or the sick look more obvious. So I would keep it away from other dogwoods and just use it as a feature plant.
Yeah.
It will need enough light so that it shines, but it doesn't want to be in the hot sun. Now the same can sort of be said about purple foliage plants. They also need a contrast of good strong colours of the green ilk around them and behind them. They certainly need to get quite a lot of direct sun because if they're in the shade, two things can happen. One is the colour of the leaf will actually fade potentially, so you end up with something that's really a dirty browny green, which is not the best look. The other issue, of course, is that if you put a purple foliage plant in the shade, if it doesn't lose its colour, it doesn't get light on it, and so therefore it's actually not going to stand out. It actually does create a black hole in the environment, so it needs light to bring its colour up.
Interesting, interesting. So what are some other purple bronze-leafed plant suggestions then?
Well, there's a whole range of them. You've got things like the purple-leafed cercis, forest pansy, which is a very popular plant in Australia as we speak.
Have you got one here?
I've got one in the garden at home. I haven't got one here. There's, of course, all the different smoke bushes in the ranges of purple, from very dark purple to sort of chocolatey colours. There's copper beeches if you're looking for a biggish tree. And there's also the pencil-y forms of those if you are a bit strapped for space.
Is there a pencil form of the copper beech?
Got one in a pot up there that we can have a look at in a minute. So there's a whole range of purple foliages. So it's really a matter of marrying them up with whatever you want to in the garden.
And being judicious. So not going crazy and really maybe going for less is more in terms of...
I think with these, yes.
A spot of colour in amongst the green rather than a sea of chlorotic yellow.
Yes, and it's the same with variegated leaves. I mean, a whole garden full of variegates would be hectic.
Vulgar. Sorry, did I say that?
Yes, you said vulgar. I would say honestly vulgar, at least. And I actually have a soft spot for variegates, so I quite like them. But again, I would use them in discretion. Well, you and I are allowed to be different. That's part of our charm.
We are. All right, well, I want to go and look at the columnar
beech. Yes.
Let's go and find it.
Yes, let's. Now, this, Matthew, is the pencil copper beech. So Fagus sylvatica, Dawyck Purple. And it grows into an enormously tall tree, but comparatively slender. So if you've got a smallish garden, you could still have a copper beech tree because the sky's free, but sideways it's always an issue. So if you plant something that grows very broad in a smallish garden, then it will take up too much space. But something narrow can just keep going for the heavens as long as you haven't put it under the eaves or in fact under the power line.
Stephen, Ryan, I just hadn't thought about all those issues about colour blocking and chlorotic.
Yes, chlorotic.
Chlorotic yellow, that it can look really sick if there's too much.
Yeah.
Wow, you kind of have to think like an artist, don't you?
You do, because you're painting a picture with leaves. Simple
with
as that.
leaves. Well, on that note, if you want to know more about the miracle of your colour paleting, you'll need to subscribe and hit the notifications bell and see what we post every week, which is every Friday.
Yes, and we hope to see you again next week.
See you next week.
Bye all.